The fluorescent lights of the gate hummed, reflecting off the polished floor. Gate C-12 was a scene of controlled chaos. Families wrestled with oversized luggage, business travelers tapped furiously on their laptops, and the air crackled with the barely suppressed frustration of a delayed flight to Atlanta. 30 minutes, then an hour. Now nobody was sure. Amidst the throng sat Mr. Williams. He was a tall, broad-shouldered black man, dressed in a simple but elegant gray suit. He was the picture of composure. Across the aisle, a white man in a wrinkled polo shirt fidgeted, his face growing redder with each passing minute. He kept glancing at Mr. Williams with barely concealed disdain. The plane itself felt like a pressure cooker. The recycled air was stale, the seats were cramped, and the delay was only amplifying the underlying tensions. The man in the polo shirt muttered something about preferring to sit next to someone more presentable. Mr. Williams simply opened his book, a worn copy of Invisible Man, and continued reading, seemingly oblivious to the brewing storm. But a slight tightening of his jaw betrayed a hint of awareness. The stage was set. The fuse was lit. The muttered comment about presentable was just the opening act. Now, the microaggressions began in earnest. The white passenger, whose name, according to his boarding pass, was Mr. Harrison, started drumming his fingers impatiently on the armrest, shooting pointed glances at Mr. Williams' book. "That thing taking up much space?" he asked, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Some of us need room to stretch our legs, you know?" Mr. Williams calmly turned a page. "I'm within my allotted space, sir." Harrison scoffed. "Allotted? Is that what they're calling it now? Seems like some people get more allotted than others." He subtly bumped Mr. Williams' elbow with his own. "Careful there. Wouldn't want to spill anything." He was referring to the small bottle of water Mr. Williams had placed on his tray table. The air grew thick with unspoken accusations. Harrison adjusted his belt, a little too forcefully, and let out a dramatic sigh. "This flight is just dreadful. And the company I'm forced to keep? Even worse." He made sure his voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear. Mr. Williams closed his book, marking his page with a small leather bookmark. He looked directly at Mr. Harrison, his expression unreadable. The game had begun. The subtle jabs weren't enough for Harrison. He needed a bigger stage. He leaned back in his seat, his voice now loud enough to carry several rows. "Honestly, some people just don't know how to behave in public." He punctuated the statement with a theatrical eye roll. A woman across the aisle, her face etched with disapproval, subtly shook her head. A young man with headphones lowered the volume. The surrounding passengers were becoming an unwilling audience to Harrison's escalating prejudice. "I paid good money for this ticket," Harrison continued, his voice rising. "I expect a certain level of comfort, and frankly, I don't feel comfortable." He stared pointedly at Mr. Williams. "Some people just make others uneasy, you know? It's a vibe, a feeling." Mr. Williams remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. His gaze was steady, unwavering. He wasn't going to give Harrison the satisfaction of a reaction. "Is there a problem, sir?" a flight attendant asked, approaching cautiously. She had clearly been alerted to the disturbance. "Yes, there is a problem," Harrison declared, puffing out his chest. "This gentleman is making me very uncomfortable. I demand something be done." The escalation had reached its peak. The audience was waiting. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, forced a smile. "Sir, I understand you're feeling uncomfortable, but I need you to be specific. What exactly is the problem?" Harrison sputtered, clearly not expecting to be challenged. "Specific? It's obvious. He's intimidating. I don't feel safe." He glanced around, seeking validation from the other passengers. A few averted their eyes. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice firm but polite, "I see no evidence of intimidating behavior. Mr. Williams is simply sitting quietly." "That's what they always do," Harrison exclaimed, his voice now bordering on a shout. "They act innocent, but you can see it in their eyes. He struggled to find the right words, his face contorted with frustration and prejudice. "Sir, I must ask you to lower your voice," Sarah said, stepping closer. "If you continue to disrupt the flight, I will have no choice but to ask you to leave." Harrison scoffed. "Leave? He's the one who should leave. He's making everyone uncomfortable." Sarah sighed. This was going nowhere. She looked at Mr. Williams, a silent question in her eyes. He simply shook his head slightly. He wasn't going to engage. The ball was in Sarah's court. This was round one, and Harrison wasn't backing down. Sarah stepped back, signaling to another flight attendant further down the aisle. She needed backup. Harrison, emboldened by what he perceived as Sarah's weakness, pressed his advantage. "I'm not going to sit here and be made to feel uncomfortable," he declared, his voice booming through the cabin. "I demand that man be removed from this flight. He's a threat. I have a right to feel safe." His words hung in the air, heavy with prejudice. Several passengers gasped. A few began recording the incident on their phones. The delay had turned into a full-blown spectacle. "This is America," Harrison continued, his face flushed. "I have rights, and my rights are being violated by having to sit next to someone like him." He spat out the last words with undisguised venom. Mr. Williams finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Sir, you are disturbing the peace. I have done nothing to you. Please refrain from harassing me." Harrison ignored him. "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm stating a fact. He's a danger. Get him off this plane." He pointed a trembling finger at Mr. Williams. The demand had been made, loud and clear, for everyone to hear. The tension was palpable. The plane felt like it was holding its breath. Mr. Williams took a slow, deliberate breath. He had remained silent, absorbing Harrison's vitriol, but the line had been crossed. He reached into his inside jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately. The silence in the cabin was now absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the airplane's engines. He pulled out a slim, leather wallet. Harrison, still flushed with anger, watched him with a mixture of disdain and suspicion. What was he going to do? Offer him money? Apologize? Mr. Williams ignored Harrison's gaze. He opened the wallet, revealing a gleaming silver badge. Below it, a laminated card displayed his photograph and official credentials. He held it up, just enough for Harrison and the nearby flight attendants to see clearly. The badge read, Central Intelligence Agency. Harrison's jaw dropped. His face, previously red with anger, paled. The triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Mr. Williams closed the wallet and returned it to his pocket, his movements calm and controlled. He looked directly at Harrison, his eyes steely. "I suggest you reconsider your assessment, sir," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I assure you, I am not the danger here." The air in the cabin shifted, the tension replaced by stunned silence. The power dynamic had just been flipped on its head. Sarah, the flight attendant, stood frozen, her mind racing. The other flight attendant who had come to assist also looked dumbfounded. They exchanged a quick glance, a silent conversation passing between them. A CIA agent? On their flight? This was far beyond their training manual. Harrison, now a pale imitation of his former self, stammered, I didn't know." He avoided eye contact with Mr. Williams, focusing instead on the worn carpet at his feet. The arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a palpable fear. Mr. Williams simply watched him, his expression unreadable. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made any threats. He had simply presented the truth, and the truth had spoken for itself. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation. "Sir," she said to Harrison, her voice now noticeably colder, "I think it would be best if you kept your comments to yourself for the remainder of the flight." She then turned to Mr. Williams, offering a small, respectful nod. "Sir, is there anything we can do to make you more comfortable?" Mr. Williams shook his head. "No, thank you. I simply wish to continue my reading." He picked up his book, Invisible Man, and resumed where he had left off. The message was clear. The matter was closed. For now. Sarah, however, wasn't quite finished. She needed to make it unequivocally clear that Harrison's behavior was unacceptable. She knelt down beside him, lowering her voice but maintaining a steely gaze. "Sir," she said, "I want to be very clear. Your behavior towards Mr. Williams was inappropriate and unacceptable. Making false accusations and creating a disturbance on a flight is a federal offense." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Had Mr. Williams not handled the situation with such grace, I would have been forced to remove you from this flight. And I assure you that is still a possibility." She leaned in closer. "Furthermore, I will be reporting this incident to the authorities upon arrival. Your actions will be reviewed, and you may face further consequences." Harrison squirmed, his eyes darting around nervously. He was clearly regretting his earlier outburst. Sarah stood up, her posture radiating authority. "Consider this your final warning. Any further disruptions, any further harassment, and you will be removed from this flight. Do you understand?" Harrison mumbled a barely audible, "Yes, ma'am." Sarah nodded curtly and walked away, leaving Harrison to stew in his own shame and regret. The second round had gone decisively to the flight attendant. The message had been delivered. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Harrison remained slumped in his seat, a picture of dejection. Mr. Williams, seemingly unfazed, continued reading his book. The other passengers, however, were buzzing with hushed conversations, their eyes darting between Mr. Williams and Harrison. A young woman across the aisle leaned over to her companion and whispered, "Did you see that badge? Thea, I wonder what he does." Another passenger, an older gentleman, chuckled softly. "Serves that loudmouth right. Judging people based on skin color. Unbelievable." The atmosphere on the plane had shifted dramatically. The tension hadn't completely dissipated, but it had been redirected. Harrison was no longer the center of attention. He was now the object of quiet scorn and speculation. Mr. Williams, despite his outward composure, felt a weariness settle over him. He was used to this kind of prejudice, but it never got easier. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He had a job to do, a mission to complete. He couldn't let Harrison's ignorance derail him. He opened his eyes, his gaze focused and determined. He would not be intimidated. He would not be deterred. He was a professional and he had a purpose. The flight to Atlanta would continue, and he would fulfill his duty. The badge had spoken, but his actions would define him. Harrison, now acutely aware of the eyes on him, tried to shrink into his seat. He fumbled with his seatbelt, adjusting it unnecessarily. He cleared his throat repeatedly, but no sound came out. The transformation was complete. The loud, aggressive passenger had been replaced by a meek, almost pathetic figure. He risked a quick glance at Mr. Williams, but quickly averted his gaze. He didn't dare to meet the CIA agent's eyes. The weight of his prejudice, now amplified by the potential consequences, pressed down on him. He mumbled something that sounded like, "Sorry," but it was so quiet that it was barely audible. It was directed at no one in particular, a general apology to the universe for his appalling behavior. He pulled out a magazine from the seat pocket in front of him, but his hands trembled so much that he could barely hold it steady. He pretended to read, but his eyes scanned the same paragraph over and over again, the words blurring together into meaningless shapes. The flight attendant, Sarah, observed him from a distance. She couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Justice, in a small way, had been served. But she also knew that this was just one incident, one small victory in a much larger battle. The plane continued its journey, carrying its passengers and their prejudices towards Atlanta. Sarah, despite her outward show of confidence, was still reeling from the badge reveal. This wasn't a disruptive passenger situation. This was something else entirely. She needed to inform the captain, but discreetly. She caught the eye of the other flight attendant, Michael, and subtly tilted her head towards the cockpit. Michael nodded imperceptibly and made his way forward, his movements casual but purposeful. Sarah, meanwhile, pulled out her communication device and pretended to check the flight manifest. In reality, she was sending a coded message to the captain, alerting him to the presence of a CIA agent on board and the incident that had occurred. She also made a mental note to review the airline's security protocols. While they covered a wide range of scenarios, they didn't specifically address how to handle a situation involving a covert operative. The captain, upon receiving the message, would undoubtedly contact the appropriate authorities on the ground. This was now a matter for the professionals. Sarah glanced at Mr. Williams, who was still engrossed in his book. She couldn't help but wonder about his mission, about the secrets he carried. She knew she would likely never know the truth, but she felt a sense of pride in having played a small part in ensuring his safety and comfort. The rest was out of her hands. The wheels were in motion. A few minutes later, after Michael had returned from the cockpit, Mr. Williams closed his book and addressed Sarah directly. His voice was low, intended only for her ears. "I understand you've alerted the captain," he said. Sarah nodded, a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "Yes, sir. Protocol." Mr. Williams offered a faint smile. "Understandable. Perhaps a brief explanation is in order, though I cannot divulge specifics." He paused, glancing around to ensure their conversation remained private. "I am on official business, requiring my presence in Atlanta. The nature of my work is sensitive. Suffice it to say, any delay would have significant repercussions." He met Sarah's gaze. "My identification is legitimate. I trust this clarifies matters." Sarah, though still curious, understood the unspoken message. He couldn't say more and she wouldn't press him. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the explanation." "Thank you for your professionalism," Mr. Williams replied. He then added, almost as an afterthought, "and for handling that unfortunate individual." He returned to his book, signaling the end of the conversation. Sarah, satisfied that she had done everything possible to manage the situation, returned to her duties. The flight continued, the secrets it carried safely guarded. The wheels were indeed in motion, but their destination remained unknown to most on board. The collective consciousness of the plane had undergone a seismic shift. Harrison's outburst had initially created an atmosphere of fear and discomfort, but Mr. Williams' revelation had replaced it with something akin to awe. Passengers who had previously ignored Mr. Williams now stole glances at him, their faces etched with curiosity and respect. They saw him not just as a black man, but as a protector, a guardian, someone entrusted with secrets and responsibilities beyond their comprehension. The woman across the aisle who had shaken her head at Harrison now offered Mr. Williams a tentative smile. The young man with the headphones gave him a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The older gentleman who had chuckled earlier raised his newspaper slightly, as if offering a silent salute. Even those who hadn't witnessed the initial confrontation sensed the change in the air. They picked up on the hushed conversations, the sideways glances, the palpable sense of importance surrounding Mr. Williams. The flight, once filled with mundane anxieties about delays and cramped seating, now felt like a journey with a purpose, a mission. Mr. Williams, whether he liked it or not, had become a symbol, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that true strength often lies hidden beneath a calm and unassuming exterior. The flight to Atlanta had become something extraordinary. For Harrison, the flight had become a personal hell. The subtle stares, the hushed whispers, the barely concealed expressions of disdain. They were a constant reminder of his own appalling behavior. He felt like a pariah, an outcast, someone unworthy of sharing the same air as the other passengers. He tried to lose himself in the pages of his magazine, but the words swam before his eyes, offering no escape from his mounting humiliation. He longed to disappear, to be swallowed up by the seat, to erase the past hour from existence. He avoided eye contact at all costs, his gaze fixed on the floor, the ceiling, anything but the faces of his fellow travelers. He hunched his shoulders, trying to make himself smaller, less visible, less of a target. Even the smallest movements seemed to amplify his shame. A cough, a sigh, a shift in his seat, each action drew unwanted attention, reminding him of his transgression. He knew that he deserved this treatment, that he had brought it upon himself. But that knowledge offered little comfort. The weight of his prejudice, now compounded by the consequences of his actions, was almost unbearable. The flight to Atlanta felt like an eternity. Each minute stretched into an hour, each hour into a lifetime. He was trapped, a prisoner of his own making. After about an hour, Sarah approached Harrison again, her expression neutral but firm. "Sir," she said, her voice low, "we have an empty seat further back. Would you prefer to move?" Harrison, desperate for any respite from the oppressive atmosphere, nodded eagerly. "Yes, please," he mumbled, barely making eye contact. Sarah led him to a seat near the rear of the plane, several rows away from Mr. Williams. The seat was next to the lavatory, not exactly prime real estate, but for Harrison it was a sanctuary. As he settled into his new seat, he could feel the weight of the other passengers' stares lifting slightly. He was still aware of their judgment, but it was less intense, less immediate. Sarah, after ensuring that Harrison was settled, made a point of checking on Mr. Williams. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked. Mr. Williams looked up from his book. "Perfectly fine, thank you," he replied, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. Sarah smiled and moved on, satisfied that she had done everything she could to defuse the situation. The flight continued, the distance between Mr. Williams and Harrison a symbolic representation of the chasm that separated their worldviews. The captain made an announcement about the expected arrival time in Atlanta. The journey was nearing its end. With a final shudder, the plane began to taxi down the runway. The engines roared to life, building in intensity. Passengers gripped their armrests, a mixture of anticipation and relief washing over them. Finally, the plane surged forward, accelerating rapidly. The ground blurred beneath them, and then, with a gentle lift, they were airborne. The wheels retracted with a thud, and the plane climbed steadily into the sky. A collective sigh swept through the cabin. The delay, the tension, the prejudice, it was all behind them, at least for now. But a lingering unease remained, a subtle reminder of the events that had unfolded on the ground. Mr. Williams closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of quiet reflection. The flight had been eventful, to say the least. He knew that the incident with Harrison was just one small example of the prejudice that still permeated society. He opened his eyes and looked out the window at the clouds below. He had a mission to complete, a duty to fulfill. He couldn't let the ignorance of others distract him from his purpose. As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign was switched off, a sense of normalcy began to return to the cabin. But the memory of the confrontation, the revelation of the badge, and the subsequent shift in power would linger long after the plane landed in Atlanta. The flight had taken off, but nothing would ever be quite the same. Another day, another flight, another reminder. Mr. Williams thought, the words echoing silently in his mind. He looked out the window, the clouds a swirling canvas of white and gray. He saw faces in those clouds, faces filled with judgment, with suspicion, with fear. Faces like Harrison's. Does it ever end? Does it matter what I do, what I've accomplished? To some, I'll always be less than. He tightened his grip on his book. Invisible. The irony was not lost on him. He had dedicated his life to serving his country, to protecting its freedoms, to upholding its values. He had faced danger, risked his life, and witnessed unspeakable horrors. Yet, on a simple flight to Atlanta, he was reduced to a stereotype, a threat, an unwelcome presence. The badge. It worked. It silenced him. But what about the others? The ones who didn't speak, but felt the same way? He sighed, a weariness settling deep in his bones. It's a burden. This constant need to prove myself, to justify my existence. He closed his eyes, seeking a moment of peace. But I can't stop. I won't stop. Too much is at stake. Star. He opened his eyes, his gaze resolute. Asterisk, I serve a purpose. And that purpose is greater than their prejudice. Asterisk, the clouds shifted. The faces disappeared. He was ready. Atlanta awaited. In his new seat near the lavatory, Harrison remained a study in misery. He wasn't angry, not anymore. The fear of potential repercussions had extinguished any lingering resentment. Remorse, however, was a more complex emotion. He likely regretted getting caught, but whether he truly regretted his prejudice was an open question. Mostly, he just wanted to disappear. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, and pretended to sleep for the remainder of the flight. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, he didn't move, save for the occasional nervous fidget. He imagined what people were saying about him, picturing their scornful faces, their judgmental whispers. He replayed the incident in his mind, cringing at his own words, his own behavior. He knew he had made a mistake, a colossal error in judgment. He had allowed his prejudice to get the better of him, and he had paid the price. Now he just wanted to get off the plane, to escape this nightmare, to start over. But even that seemed impossible. He knew that he would carry this shame with him, that the memory of this flight would haunt him for years to come. He had been exposed, his true nature revealed. There was no escaping the consequences of his actions. He was trapped, not just on the plane, but in his own skin. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, the older gentleman who had subtly saluted Mr. Williams with his newspaper earlier approached him. He waited until the aisle was clear and then leaned in close, his voice low and respectful. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to say, thank you." Mr. Williams looked up, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Thank you?" "Yes," the man replied, "for handling that situation with such grace and dignity. It wasn't easy, I'm sure." He paused, offering a knowing smile. "And for reminding us that appearances can be deceiving." Mr. Williams returned the smile. "It's a constant battle," he said quietly, "but it's a battle worth fighting." "Indeed," the man agreed. He extended his hand. "My name is Arthur. It was an honor to share this flight with you." Mr. Williams shook his hand firmly. "The honor was mine, Arthur." Arthur returned to his seat, leaving Mr. Williams with a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't much, just a few words of acknowledgement, but it was enough. It was a reminder that even in the face of prejudice, there were still people who saw him, who understood, who cared. And that, in itself, was a victory. The plane touched down smoothly, the wheels hitting the tarmac with a gentle bump. Atlanta had arrived. As the plane taxied to the gate, a flurry of activity erupted in the cabin. Passengers gathered their belongings, eager to disembark. Mr. Williams remained calm, waiting for the aisle to clear. He collected his briefcase and prepared to exit with purpose. Harrison, on the other hand, was a man possessed. He practically leaped from his seat, grabbing his small carry-on bag and shoving his way towards the front of the plane. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone, desperate to escape the confines of the aircraft and the judgmental stares of his fellow passengers. He practically sprinted down the aisle, bumping into other passengers without apology. He just wanted to get out, to disappear into the anonymity of the airport. Mr. Williams, observing his frantic exit, shook his head slightly. He knew that Harrison's shame would follow him long after he left the plane. When the aisle was finally clear, Mr. Williams stepped off the plane with a sense of quiet determination. He had a mission to complete, and he wouldn't let the prejudice of others deter him. He walked briskly through the jet bridge, his gaze focused on the task ahead. The flight to Atlanta was over, but his journey was just beginning. The city awaited. What awaited Mr. Williams in Atlanta? What secrets did he carry in his briefcase? What mission was so important that it required his immediate presence? These questions would likely remain unanswered, shrouded in the secrecy that defined his profession. Did Harrison face any consequences for his actions? Would he be reported to the authorities? Would he be placed on a no-fly list? Or would he simply fade back into anonymity, carrying his shame and prejudice with him, a silent reminder of the darkness that still lingered in the world. Perhaps Sarah, the flight attendant, followed through with her threat and reported the incident. Perhaps the airline conducted an internal investigation. Perhaps Harrison received a stern warning, a fine, or even a temporary ban from flying. But the true consequences were likely more subtle, more insidious. The memory of that flight, the weight of his shame, the knowledge that he had been exposed, these were burdens that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And what about the other passengers? Would they forget what they had witnessed? Or would the memory of that flight serve as a reminder to challenge prejudice whenever they encountered it, to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult? The questions lingered, unanswered, hanging in the air like the scent of jet fuel. The story, like the flight, had reached its destination, but its impact would continue to resonate. This flight, with all its drama and tension, serves as a small picture of the bigger problem of racism and prejudice in our world. It shows how easily people can judge others based on how they look, instead of getting to know them as people. Mr. Williams showed us the importance of staying calm and strong, even when facing unfair treatment. He didn't let Harrison's words change who he was or stop him from doing what he needed to do. The story also reminds us that we can't always know what someone is going through or what they have done. Mr. Williams' CIA badge was a surprise, and it showed that people are often more than what we see on the surface. It is important to remember to treat everyone with respect, no matter their skin color or where they come from. We should try to understand each other and judge people by their actions and their hearts, not by what we think we know about them. This flight to Atlanta was more than just a trip from one place to another. It was a lesson about kindness, understanding, and the power of being true to yourself, even when others try to bring you down. It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to make the world a fairer place. One flight, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time.